Yassine, fantastic to get you on Real Vision.
Great to be here, Raoul. Really excited about this conversation.
First, just tell us what you do, and then we're going to go back in the past and find out how the hell you got here.
Absolutely. So I currently lead crypto research and business development at Ark Invest. If for those maybe not familiar with Ark, we're an asset management firm focused exclusively on disruptive innovation. So we primarily invest in the public equity universe, and we invest thematically across 5 technology platforms: genomics, DNA sequencing, automation, robotics, energy storage, AI, and one crypto. So I cover kind of the crypto theme. Started off just how do we get derivative exposure in the public equity space, and then more broadly, how do we get the most efficient exposure?
Give me a bit of your background. How did you get into this? I mean,
it's funny. So I was not a Bitcoin OG where I could say I found Bitcoin in the back page of a talk forum in 2013. I actually fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole first my junior year of college. So I studied at the University of Pennsylvania. I studied systems engineering and finance. And actually very early on, I told myself I didn't want to do the traditional kind of investment banking or consulting route that every pre-professional university prides themselves on being a feeder school for. It's like my freshman year, I would literally go into an info session and you'd have these people with literal business cards as freshmen in suits, and they'd be like, "Hey, add me on LinkedIn." I was like, "What have you done?"
That sounds horrific.
So that was an immediate turnoff for me, where I was like, okay, I go to a good school, but I'm not gonna be an ant in an ant colony. And so from the very onset, I was quite kind of anti-establishment per se. And my junior year, I was fortunate enough to have found a small venture capital firm that allowed me to basically dive into any area of research that I was interested in. And at the time, it was early 2017. Obviously, the headlines of ETH crossing $100 and Bitcoin crossing $2,000, and I was like, let's see if there's something interesting for me to explore there. So got the opportunity to look at it from an investment and tech perspective, and honestly, it was like, okay, this is extremely compelling, both from a philosophical standpoint and from just an opportunity standpoint, where not many people know what's going on even today. And so for me, it was like, I want to find a full-time job in the space. Stumbled upon Ark through Twitter, and really the rest is history. Kind of the power of meritocracy in this information age, where you can send a DM or you can retweet or you can write a thread, and you will get noticed. So I've been at Ark now for about 4 years, primarily because I'm extremely fascinated by the whole crypto space and have fallen down the rabbit hole very deep.
So when you first got into crypto, what was the thing that anchored you into it? So everyone comes with a different thing. Some people come with the philosophy, some people come with the kind of libertarian ideals, other people come with a financial system. What was your anchor?
So it was, I think, a few things. I think the first is the idea of how many themes and convergences crypto has to offer. There was this one chart that shows like a Venn diagram of all of the kind of concepts that crypto as a core kind of industry or idea touches on. So whether it's philosophy or politics or money or distributed systems or economic incentives, it was just like this massive rabbit hole that actually had a niche for everyone. And it was particularly when I came into it, it's like I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. I was studying both engineering and finance, so there was this convergence of, okay, can you use both to breathe life into the system? So it ended up being a very natural extension. But for me, it was more so kind of the ground root, kind of bottom up evolution of crypto that was so fascinating to me, especially in the context of like what I had been exposed to, where most things are top down, where there's a playbook, where if you follow a set of rules, you're gonna make it, quote unquote. And crypto kind of represented everything opposite to that. So on one hand, it was specific to kind of my personality of being and against the grain or anti-establishment. But on the other hand, it's like there's a reason why there are tons of rabbit holes in crypto and why everyone kind of converges towards affiliating themselves in some way to the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the unique things is we all start somewhere on our journey. And then the more time you spend, the bigger it is.
Right.
Until you can't see anything else.
Right.
And it's weird because people outside who haven't really taken that time, the kind of 1,000 hours you need to do to get involved, don't get it. And it sounds like this weird world. But as you say, it breaks down into so many different areas that are impacting every single part of both the financial system, our social lives, our economic lives, everything.
And to your point, it's like not only can you not unsee it, or once you spend 1,000 hours, you realize there's so much, but it's like the more you discover, the more you realize how much you still don't know either. And that's also what's a very both motivating and humbling kind of field to be in, where it's like, I'm not trying to figure out the answer to everything. I've sort of acknowledged that there's absolutely no way that I can get a grasp on everything, but it's like a constant valve of endless learning and information and basically satiation of curiosity. So that's also something where it's like my job really feels like I'm just learning. I have a front row seat on kind of the future of tech broadly. I'm curious, Raoul, what was your kind of foray into crypto?
I had gone through the financial crisis in 2008, kind of predicted it, saw how bad it got. Then I was living in Spain when we almost lost the banking system in Europe, and Cyprus bailed in the banks and all of this. And I thought, okay, this debt problem is a huge issue. So I started going around the world looking to set up the world's safest bank. Thinking, can I find a bank that has no leverage, just holds US treasuries or whatever? And then a friend of mine tapped me on the shoulder back in 2012 and said, what about Bitcoin? And I noticed it. It was on my radar screen. I probably wrote the first macro strategy paper on Bitcoin in 2013, comparing it to gold, using the above ground supply of gold and the known reserves of gold, backed it out into Bitcoin and said, well, if gold's at $1,300, Bitcoin's worth $1 million. And the difference between here and there was adoption. And so I first invested when it was at 200 back in 2013, saying this is the best risk reward I've ever seen in my entire lifetime, and it's continued to play out.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
How do you deal with the complexity of the space? I mean, I deal with it by admitting that I don't need to know everything and that I don't know everything, and nobody knows where this is going because it's a complex ecosystem that's adaptive and endlessly evolving. But people struggle. It was really easy when it was a Bitcoin only world, and then it was a Bitcoin and ETH world, and now it's like, oh my God, how do you get your head around all of this?
There are two angles to take with that question, where it's like, how do you deal with it maybe from an investment standpoint, right? Or it's like an asset management standpoint.
Yeah, and also from a personal exhaustion standpoint.
But then also, how do you deal with it from like your own personal curiosity of like, what is it that you're going to be looking at today? So for me, it's one, there's so much noise. There is a ton of noise. And I think the biggest difficulty for me was like, okay, how do you filter the signal from the noise? Especially because arguably the most reliable sources are like the Twitters and, maybe the Discords and the Telegrams of the world. Which you kind of have to sift through before you find the real signal. So practically, it's like I've actually developed a group of people that I honestly trust, that I've learned to rely on, to kind of help me sort of guide my thinking. And that actually started in the early days, where what I'd do is I would basically go on Twitter and follow a bunch of people and have all of their notifications turned on, and basically follow for maybe a week or 2 weeks every single reply or retweet or tweet they effectively they had or they shared their blogs. And that would allow me to create like a mental model of exactly what their framing is and what their way of thinking is. And from there, it's like, okay, how this person thinks, so let's go and see how that person thinks. And then it's a matter of, okay, synthesizing it and coming up with not necessarily a cohesive narrative, but a narrative that allows for you to really get a sense of, what people are thinking and their differences in opinions, largely because there's a ton out there. In terms of how I deal with it, I tend to think like the principles and the philosophical alignment with my own, like with who I am is kind of how I navigate the space broadly, because then it's just a never ending perpetual cycle of here's the next coin that's going to be 10x better, faster, cheaper. So something like Bitcoin, for example, I think is an irreplaceable network. With regard to kind of its conception, with some of the network effects that it's been able to command, with its sort of design implementation, and something like kind of recreating global-based money or creating an alternative to digital to gold, or creating a uncensorable monetary network is something that there really is no other use case, in my opinion, that is more interesting to me. And with that as like the anchor, it becomes easier to navigate and not necessarily look at the next shinier, faster, better thing. I think obviously the next generation protocols are really, really interesting, but you can very easily get lost in the next shinier, better, faster thing if it's only based on what is interesting, right? So as an asset manager, as someone who like just tries to navigate the space, like what are the set of principles that I like abide by, that will kind of stick through regardless of whatever the next generation protocol might look like. And that's helped a lot with my sanity, with my mental health, and just with kind of navigating the space broadly.